Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate this opportunity. First of all, I would like to ask you about the whole situation with this attack on March 14th. Do you think that chance and the threat of the bigger war, regional war, or even bigger war, is avoided already, that we have actually survived this?
I don't think that the escalation is pointing towards what you are suggesting yet, although we never know to what extent one side will push for that. Understand that this is the behavior of a regime that is becoming weaker and weaker and is desperate. And at the same time that they have launched this recent attack directly at Israel, they have also started repressing people yet again at home, attacking Iranian women on the streets of Iran. This is again indicative of the nature of this regime that constantly tries to create conflict and tensions. This is not new. It has been doing that for years, using its proxies regionally. We saw what happened on October 7th when Hamas attacked Israel. And all of this is really the tentacles of a regime that has been doing this time and again and basically threatening the stability in the region, which leads me to say that unless there's a fundamental shift in foreign policy vis-a-vis this regime, beyond the status quo, we can only expect to have more of these kind of tensions. And as you say, who knows to what it could lead, but it can be avoided provided that there's a fundamental change in foreign policy of key governments in the region and in the West.
So you have mentioned already that the regime is getting weaker, but could you give us a little bit more details about the reasons, about the motives of Iranian government? Why on earth they have decided to, to attack the territory of a different country? This is the first thing like that in the whole history of Iran. What would you see as a main reason for this kind of very threatening and dangerous for everyone step?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, because basically you cannot expect a rational explanation, because the nature of this regime from the very beginning, in its DNA, is to export an ideology beyond Iran's border to the entire world. It is based on a vision of a modern-day Shiite caliphate that would dominate the region and ultimately will defeat its enemy, which is basically the West and all of its values of liberty and freedom and human rights, in order to subjugate everyone under that one individual religious doctrine, which is why Khomeini used Iran 45 years ago, to use it as a launching pad to export this revolution to the region and beyond. It was not for the benefit of the Iranian people. This regime have had access to billions and billions of revenues, which was not spent on the Iranian people, a nation that today lives, 60% of Iran's society lives under the poverty line. People are struggling economically. Our currency has been devalued 10,000 times since the revolution. Iran is right now a country that could have been South Korea. Instead, it has become North Korea. All of it because of this regime that persists on maintaining its extremism and radicalism and fomenting terrorism. It is not against its nature. In fact, this is its nature. And this takes me to the argument that, and I've been arguing this for years, that the most fundamental flaw in the interpretation, or at least expectation, of the free world in particular as to how to deal with this regime was based on the premise of behavior change. And everything that you've seen for the past 3 decades in terms of diplomacy or trying to negotiate with this regime or attempting appeasement, they have all failed, because at the end of the day, the expectation of behavior change was the wrong one to begin with. So therefore, you cannot expect a rational behavior by the regime. Why would they do that? Because it hurts the Iranian people. It also hurts the region. The only explanation is because they need to do all of this in order to survive. If they were not doing these things, it won't be the Islamic regime anymore. So therefore, we need to start thinking about what can happen beyond this regime, and that the solution is not to expect this regime to change its behavior or to negotiate any deals with it, but to think as the solution being a change of this regime, which is what the Iranian people want.
Yes, I will ask you about the mood in Iran and about people reacting on this kind of steps by Iranian government. But before that, you have mentioned a lot of money that regime is earning, actually, and I can assume that there are millions of dollars that they are earning thanks to the cooperation with Russia. They are selling Shahed drones to Russia. They are friends with Russia, with Kremlin, Vladimir Putin personally. What do you think about this kind of partnership? What thoughts you have about that and how it affects the situation in the country?
Well, as you pointed, this sort of symbiosis between Moscow and Tehran can only lead, especially when the regime is emboldened as a result of weakness from the Western world and an appeasement tactic, and the release of more funds that they shouldn't have had access to if the oil sanctions were implemented. All of these plays into this hand that the regime now feels that they can support Russia in its war against the Ukraine. And basically, you see how this issue goes well beyond just one element. It's all over the place. The fingerprints of this regime is all over the place. And unfortunately, the current the relationship that exists between Moscow and Tehran has a very negative interpretation among the Iranian people. They see that, in a way, supporting the Iranian regime as part of its repression against its own citizens is in direct relationship between these two governments at this point. And this cannot be a positive thing for long-term Russia-Iran relationship in the future.
And going back to the people's mood in Iran, you personally have condemned this attack against Israel. Simultaneously, we can see and we know that there is a huge protest in Iran. We saw the waves of this mass protest, and unfortunately, it was pressed by the government officials and by the police forces and so on and so forth. We can see right now, after this attack, that Iranian government and state television are showing to the people the videos of fires in Texas and Chile and other places to prove that this attack was successful. Does anyone in Iran actually buy it? I assume that you have good sources inside the country. What is the reaction?
Look, I think that access to social media and what is being said in the outside world is not something that people inside Iran do not monitor or are unable to monitor. And thank God for that, because the regime, of course, is trying to use all sorts of treacheries and tactics, using footages that are not even real, but that doesn't fool people. And of course, on our part, we always try to message what the Iranian people need to hear. And fortunately, free medias that distributes the reality on the ground, and people themselves, citizen reporters who report back to the outside world what's happening on the streets of Iran and what's the opinion of the Iranian people, doesn't even come close to what the regime is desperately trying to manufacture or to attempt. This is a very important element in terms of how masses are no longer tricked by any leadership. 45 years ago, when Khomeini came with some false promise and everybody thought, oh my God, this is going to be a solution, media was not the way it is these days. You didn't have Twitter, you didn't have Instagram, you didn't have all these various social media platforms that people can even bypass what they've been told by governmentally controlled medias around the world and have an independent way of verifying or ascertain the veracity of any information. So to your question, I would say the regime may in fact try to trick people or lie to people, but Iranians have learned how much deceitful and lying this regime has been. So it has very, very little credibility, including in its attempt to use some brainwashing tactics or media tactics to fool people. Not many people buy it. It's only for the consumption of the roots, grassroots support. I mean, the core support that remains for the regime, which is very limited. It's only for those who benefit from this regime in this mafia type system. But the majority of the people are definitely not buying it and are not fooled by it.
So I'm sure that you've been asked this question a lot of times, but I need to ask it again. Your Royal Highness, what do you think may be the trigger, the last trigger for the people in Iran to make changes? I understand that, hey, they tried a lot and bravely tried, and there were big attempts just recently, but I would wonder what can be the last thing to happen and things would change and you would go back to your country.
Well, if you have seen the ultimate successful end to struggles that people have had vis-a-vis an existing regime in their countries, whether it is solidarity in Poland or the movement of the ANC in South Africa and other examples we can use, where ultimately, people were, I guess, liberated or came to a better solution than what they had. This could not have happened, especially if we are trying to avoid violence or methods that are as a result of conflict. I'm talking about civil disobedience and non-violence being the most important elements to reduce the cost for change to a nation. It could not have happened without tacit support from the free world. In this case, I think one of the elements that is really absent is the kind of strong leadership that we expect the outside world to provide. During the Second World War, there were two strong leaders, one in Washington, one in London. I'm talking about Roosevelt and Churchill, and that was very important to bring an end to the war with the Nazis. We saw the strong leadership of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher towards the end of the Soviet Union, and what Mikhail Gorbachev at the time realized and led to perestroika and glasnost, and ultimately what happened in your country. I think today, when you look at what's happening in our region, there's no such leadership that exists. So regardless of what the Iranian people do, is it enough for the ultimate change? I always tell my own compatriots, we have to rely on ourselves and nobody else, but it will be so much easier for us to succeed if we had the actual support from the free world. So the question really is, the ultimate step is to have a campaign of maximum pressure on the maximum support for the Iranian people, but also a decisive change of policy that goes beyond what I explained to you in the earlier answer, that you should not seek any more a solution by negotiating with a regime that will never change its path. It depends on their survival to continue doing what they have. So they will never change that behavior. Instead, look at Iran and the Iranian people as your best allies and an alternative to this regime. And once liberated, Iranians will show the world that we are peace-loving nations. We want to have peaceful and cordial relations with our neighbors, whether it's the Israelis or the Arabs, and obviously the rest of our immediate region and the rest of the world. And the only obstacle between us and the rest of the free world is this regime. So it's time to really invest on the Iranian people. We are doing our part, but I think at this point, a key factor will be how the free world will come and join us in this liberation movement.
Thank you so much. I really hope that things that are necessary would be done by the free world. This is the thing that we are actually expecting, the liberal Russian opposition. Thank you, and good luck with everything.
I appreciate that, and I must say that if you listen to the voice of dissidents who are the first victims and understand the best what's happened in any given country, I'm sure that you will hear the same exact arguments that I've provided to you today. I'm trying to be the voice of the voiceless that don't have the kind of access to respond, and I'm carrying this message, and I appreciate this opportunity you give me to share with you what I think the majority of my compatriots firmly believe, and definitely anything from the end of people who can support us and give us moral support can go a long way in giving people a sense that they are not abandoned or forgotten, but the world does respond to their cry, and I think the time has come for that.
Your Royal Highness, I appreciate this conversation.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.